Hello, this is Frank Falvey with Frank Presents, and today it's my privilege and honor to have Graham Moore with the Massachusetts for Mental Health Options. Welcome to the program, Graham.
Thank you so much, Frank. I'm very happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you, and the reason that you're here is the Secretary of State has sent out the ballot questions that are going to appear on the November 5th ballot. There are 5 ballot questions, and the question we're going to address today is question number 4. So I guess one of the first questions of number 4 that I have is number 4 is entitled Limited Legalization and Regulations of Certain Natural psychedelic substances.
Yes.
What psychedelic substances are we talking about, and what do they do?
So we're talking about 5 psychedelic substances, all of which have centuries or thousands of use in certain indigenous communities and are already legally available for therapeutic purposes abroad. And in the case of 2 of them, psilocybin and psilocin, they're actually already available in 2 U.S. states, Oregon and Utah, in controlled settings. So the 5 substances are psilocybin and psilocin. Psilocybin, when you consume psilocybin, it's actually converted into psilocin in the body. So those are kind of the same thing. Both psilocybin and psilocin are found in certain species of mushrooms. You may have heard of magic mushrooms, so the active ingredients in those are psilocybin and psilocin. In addition to psilocybin and psilocin, the other substances are mescaline, which is the active ingredient in peyote, if you've heard of that.
In what?
Peyote. It's also found in a cactus that's already legal in the United States.
Is peyote in the western part of the country?
Yes, it's in the western part of the country. It has a long history and extensively documented history in certain indigenous communities. So mescaline is the active ingredient in peyote. Peyote actually will remain criminalized under this measure, but a different cactus, San Pedro cactus, has mescaline in it. So mescaline is one of the substances. The third substance is dimethyltryptamine, otherwise known as DMT. That is the active ingredient, or one of the active ingredients in ayahuasca, which is a plant medicine that has been used for thousands of years in indigenous communities in South America, and has been used quite extensively by veterans in recent decades to treat PTSD. The final substance in the measure, the 5th substance, is ibogaine, which is an African psychedelic, and is actually a prescription medication already in a few countries and has been used specifically off-label in New Zealand to treat opioid addiction since around 2010. So those are the substances in our measure. They all have demonstrated therapeutic value in that 2 of them, psilocybin and ibogaine, are already prescription medications abroad used for treating treatment-resistant depression in Australia. That's psilocybin. And opioid addiction, that's ibogaine in New Zealand and a couple other countries. The other 2 substances have been used, as I said before, extensively for therapeutic and spiritual purposes abroad and for thousands of years in some communities.
So traditionally, going back to, particularly you mentioned native indigenous people have used them. Have they used them, obviously they've used them for spiritual purposes. The Indians used peyote, right?
Yes.
As a spiritual, is that what they smoked in the peace pipe?
I don't know if I think that was tobacco that was typically smoked. I don't know if peyote is smoked. I think it's just consumed. But when we say spiritual use, I think the right way to say it would be spiritual therapeutic use. So mescaline use in indigenous communities has been studied, and it's been documented to be associated with positive mental health outcomes. And all these substances, when traditionally used, they have a spiritual component to them that's very important, but they're seen as healing substances. And
healing substances in reference not to physical ailments, but to emotional and anxiety ailments?
In some cases, physical elements, but yes, in
Oh, really?
particular, so there's some preliminary evidence that certain psychedelics can help with physical pain, but that evidence is very preliminary, so we don't focus on it. But a lot of the use, both in indigenous communities and out, has been more on psychological or behavioral issues, including addiction as well. So all of the substances in this measure are non-addictive. They are typically used fairly infrequently. Some people will only use them once or twice in a lifetime. And in controlled settings, just 1 or 2 doses has been associated with months and in some cases even years of relief from severe mental illness and addiction. So psilocybin, one of the substances in our measure, has been studied in a few clinical trials for treating alcohol addiction. And in some cases, it has been observed that people who have taken psilocybin in conjunction with therapy, they totally quit alcohol after just 2 doses, and that's been observed to last for at least 8 months in one clinical trial among a large proportion of those patients. So these show a lot of promise, not just for behavioral health issues like PTSD and depression, but also addiction.
How do they work? Do we know what it is that makes them work within your body?
People have different theories. We don't know for sure how they work, similar to how we don't know for sure how antidepressants work or a lot of medications work. What's speculated is that they increase the brain's neuroplasticity, and that lets people get out of destructive loops, or people are sort of stuck in the wrong gear shift. They're always depressed, or they're always anxious, or they're always craving alcohol or tobacco or opioids, and this helps them get unstuck. It gives them this critical period where they can reevaluate their life, feel free of pre-existing patterns, and chart a new path forward.
Who are the people that you would anticipate would be using these drugs, and what difficulties do they have that you're hoping the drugs will cure or help with?
So I want to make very clear to the audience that people are already using these substances. There are a few nonprofits that are veteran-led, including the Heroic Hearts Project, which I encourage people to look up, that are sponsoring veterans and veteran spouses to access this care legally abroad. So the sort of people who are accessing this already in large part are veterans. They're people with end-of-life distress. They're people with certain severe forms of mental illness and addiction, particularly opioid addiction. A lot of people with opioid addiction are going to Mexico. People can look this up to access ibogaine treatment, for example. There are people with severe depression. A lot of the people in Oregon who are accessing this treatment in a legal program in Oregon suffer from depression. So people are already accessing this, which is one of the reasons why we want to make this safe, legal, no longer criminalized in Massachusetts, is to make that safer, what's already happening. In terms of the issues with that, one of the issues is cost. You know, it's very expensive to go abroad or to fly out to Oregon to access this. And when you're doing this in a controlled setting, as we're planning to set up, it can be somewhat pricey. So that's one barrier. The other barrier is the illegality and the risk of going underground and being administered something by somebody who's not trustworthy, who's not regulated, who's not scrupulous. So those are two of the big issues people have.
I noticed that as I read this, apparently you're only going to be taking these under a supervised place and under a supervised person that's licensed to, I don't know whether administer is the right word or observe is, what is the right word? First of all, you're not in your home, you're going to a place where this is going to be administered. How is it administered? Is it a pill? What is it?
So a lot of the details for our program are to be determined. So the way this works is if this passes, a new regulatory agency is set up with a commission and an unpaid advisory board of experts appointed by the governor, attorney general, and treasurer. And those experts have to include by law in this measure an emergency medical services expert and a mental health expert. So they'll determine a lot of the details in terms of is it a pill or a tea. I believe in Oregon it's a pill with psilocybin mushroom inside it, but some of the details are to be determined. However, in law, and this is very important, in this law, people getting this regulated care, they have to have at least 3 appointments, and they also have to be screened to make sure they don't have any contraindications before they access it. So if somebody were to get screened and it was determined that their medical history didn't preclude them from safely accessing this, then they would have to go in initially for a preparation session. And during that session, they'd be prepared for the experience of taking one of these substances. They'd be told what to expect. They'd be guided in how to set their intention, how to make best use of the experience, how to feel comfortable, how to feel safe. And then if Oregon's any example of how we set it up here, in Oregon there's actually a waiting period. So then after this preparation session, there'd be a waiting period, perhaps of 24 hours, and then they'd come in for a second appointment. And during that second appointment, they would be administered, I think administered is the right word, one of the therapeutic substances, and then they'd take it under the supervision 100% of a licensed professional. They wouldn't be by themselves except when they went to the bathroom. They'd be kept safe for the entire period, and afterwards they'd have to be driven home. And then even after that, the law specifies they have to come in for a third appointment, an integration session. That session is to check in with them, make sure they're still feeling good, that they're safe, in addition to helping them set their intention and maximize the therapeutic benefit. So let me give an example of why that's important and what that could look like. Somebody who has a real drinking problem, who's addicted to alcohol, who hasn't tried to quit, who's gone through rehab and relapsed, they might turn to this, okay? And after being administered psilocybin, they might, as has been observed already, they might no longer crave alcohol. They might have this freedom from the addiction. But that's not necessarily going to last. That desire not to drink might not last indefinitely. You know, it might last a month. So that integration session, that third appointment, when they come in, they'll be counseled on how to avoid getting back into bad habits, how to avoid perhaps hanging out with the same friends who bring them out drinking every night, how to avoid picking up the bottle again, so that they take advantage of that critical window when they no longer crave alcohol to not become addicted again. So that's why that's important, and that's all required by law in this measure. I think it's really important that everybody know that there's no retail component to this measure. It's not going to create an industry like cannabis. You can't buy these things and take them home. You have to take them under the supervision of a licensed professional. Buying and selling remains illegal under this measure, period.
In medicine, they give the reason to take it, and then they have a whole bunch of downside effects. What are the possible downside effects?
The possible downside effects. In very, very, very rare circumstances, people can have prolonged psychotic reactions. They can have lasting increases in certain mental health conditions, negative mental health conditions, but these are extremely rare outcomes. Typical negative outcomes would be slightly elevated anxiety or depression for a period of weeks or months. These very severe negative outcomes are very, very, very rarely seen. And let me give you an example. In Oregon, where a program like this is already established, there have been over 12,699 doses administered as of September 3rd, 2024. And of all those doses, only on 4 occasions have emergency services been called to respond because of a severe adverse reaction. And there's no reported deaths associated with all of those doses. So around the world, in the Netherlands, in Jamaica, and Costa Rica, and Mexico, where these substances are available legally already, severe adverse reactions are very, very, very rare, especially in a controlled setting like we're trying to set up here. So there is a possibility, like with any medication, of something bad happening, but it's very unlikely.
Should we, what you're kind of saying, it sounds like, is that we shouldn't be concerned about driving, operating a machinery, if someone is taking these drugs?
So don't take these drugs and drive, please. Definitely you shouldn't be under the influence of these substances and drive, but in terms of the real world, There's never been a study associating the use of these substances with increased traffic accidents or increased traffic fatalities. And the reality is if people take a full dose, a therapeutic dose of these things, they're not going to be moving around much. They're not really going to be tempted to drive.
So how long does it take to leave your body?
It depends on the substance, and there's a difference between when it leaves your body and when the acute effects are over. With psilocybin psilocin, which is the most well-researched of the substances, it lasts about 6 hours. And by the end of 6 hours, you're pretty much stone cold sober for the most part, but as a precaution, we're still going to require people to be driven home afterward. With some of the other substances, they last considerably longer. So mescaline can last 12 to 16 hours. Ibogaine, which is a very, very intense drug that people don't use recreationally at all, that can last 16 to 30 hours. That's one reason why a lot of the details are left to the discretion of this regulatory body, is because a one-size-fits-all regulatory approach doesn't make sense with these different substances.
Let me cover some administrative details. There is, as you mentioned, going to be an administrative commission that's going to issue regulations. There is going to be an advisory board.
An unpaid advisory board. Unpaid.
Yeah, unpaid, but an advisory board. There is going to be a 15% excise tax imposed by the state, along with, I gather, the normal sales tax. And if it is permitted in a community, it looks like they have an option of having a 2% local tax. The community, local community, cannot necessarily prohibit or cannot downright prohibit the sale or a facility in that community. It can regulate business hours, and it can regulate the operation of that. I imagine that would come under the purview of the Board of Health, but I didn't necessarily see that. Now, I was surprised in this sense. I don't know whether it's good or bad. There's 13 pages of regulation in this proposal. Is this proposal, in your opinion, good? I mean, is all the loose ends tied up? Or is there any unforeseen consequence that isn't covered in here?
I think it is good. So I want to address two of the points. One is
Sure.
how this would look in communities in Massachusetts. As you said, communities will be able to set rules and some guidelines for how this would be in their communities, even though they couldn't explicitly forbid it from coming in. But what I want to make clear is that we do not anticipate this being a large industry because there is no retail sales component, because this is not creating an industry like cannabis, and demand for these substances is pretty low, like under 5% of adults in the US, based on a recent study, use these substances on an annual basis. We don't anticipate this being everywhere. The demand simply doesn't exist in Massachusetts for these psychedelic therapy centers to be in every single place in the state. It's not going to look like cannabis. There's not going to be billboards everywhere. So probably only very few communities will even see this because the demand is just going to be low. Because as people really wanting this for therapeutic purposes are going to access this. There's no retail sales, there's no recreational sales component. So that's answering the first thing about how this will look in communities. In terms of, do I think this proposal is good? I do think this proposal is good. I think this proposal is going to be great for Massachusetts. And one thing I want to make very, very clear is there's no loophole around sales here. So this measure specifically says that people cannot distribute it in association for take-home use, in association with any business activity. So people can't be selling hugs or selling walks or selling therapy and then giving people mushrooms to take home. That's explicitly forbidden in this bill. Colorado, which passed a similar bill, actually had a loophole so that people could sell services around these substances. We do not. This is very, very carefully done so that this does not create an industry like cannabis where there's storefronts everywhere and this is being sold for take-home.
As you say, this is what is the cost that's going to end up to the individual that goes for this service? Any idea? You mentioned Oregon. Do we have an idea what the cost of the service will be to the individual? Because it won't be covered by health insurance, correct?
Initially, it will not be covered by health insurance. The substances themselves will not be covered by health insurance so long as they remain federally illegal. However, we do believe potentially insurance could cover the therapy that's administered in conjunction with the substances. So eventually, some of it might be reimbursed by insurance, but initially, we anticipate people paying for this out of pocket. In Oregon, the cost of one of these administrations, including the surrounding therapy, is typically around $1,500. It's offered cheaper in some cases.
$1,500.
$1,500. We anticipate and hope that the regulations here will reduce that price, but the high cost has to be contextualized with the fact that in Massachusetts now, to pay for a social worker for 6 hours of their time is already over $600. So, and the other thing is that these treatments, 1 or 2, for a lot of people is going to be sufficient for a whole year. So it's not really much more expensive than other forms of care. It's just the cost, it's a higher cost up front at one time than you might get over a whole year's worth of therapy.
But you know, one of the points that was made in here is veterans and PTS. But I can't picture a veteran that has a PTS problem coming up with $1,500. That's for the 3 treatments or each treatment?
It could be each treatment. But we can try to bring the price down, and the thing is it will certainly be cheaper than it will be to go abroad. And in addition to that, we hope and anticipate that there will be support from nonprofits to help sponsor this care. So again, I encourage you and others at home to look up the Heroic Hearts Project, a nonprofit founded and led by an Army Ranger combat veteran, Jesse Gould, who supports our measure. They are paying for veterans to access this country legally abroad using philanthropic donations. Their goal, of course, is to bring the cost of therapy down here to have it be available in Massachusetts. We hope and expect it will be cheaper than Oregon, but we can't deny that the cost of somebody watching somebody for 6 hours and then providing supportive therapy around that, that's going to be a little bit pricey.
Are there facilitators that are already trained, I mean, already would meet whatever licensing standard the commission might set, or is that going to be a problem in training people to administer the psychedelic items?
I wouldn't say it's going to be a problem, but we anticipate people having to be trained. So in Oregon, people have already been licensed and have already been providing this care for a little over a year. Potentially, the regulatory committee in Massachusetts could grandfather those people in. So if somebody was licensed in Oregon, they could do this here. Similarly, the measure right now has a tiered licensure structure. So certain people with certain qualifications could take more or less time to get qualified. So if somebody was a psychiatrist and they wanted to do this, potentially it would be faster for them to be approved. On the flip side, if people were dealing with vulnerable populations like veterans with PTSD, they might require more training. In Oregon, as a baseline, a facilitator requires 160 hours of training before they can watch somebody taking this substance in a controlled setting. So the answer is we think plenty of people will be interested to do this. We have people who have some hands-on experience already. As for how that all comes together, that'll be determined, but I am very confident this will be able to be delivered on time in around a 2-year time frame.
Graham Moore, what's the issue that we haven't covered that's important for the people watching to know about?
I think the most important thing is the dire need, that we have hundreds of suicides in this state, just in this state. Every year, nationally, veterans have been dealing with a suicide epidemic and have for decades. Over 6,000 veterans lose their lives every year to suicide. Our campaign is rooted, unfortunately, in that crisis. While I myself am not a veteran, our grassroots campaign director, our chair, Emily Onischuk, is a Navy veteran. Another one of our directors, Jamie Morey, our engagement community director, is the spouse of an Iraq War combat veteran who has struggled with the care he's received under the VA. So there's this crisis going on, and people are literally dying. People are dying by suicide, people are dying by drug overdose, people are dying related to alcohol and tobacco. Tobacco remains the leading preventable cause of death in Massachusetts, and psilocybin, in both a clinical study and in observational studies has been associated with reductions in tobacco smoking. So there's a real dire need for more alternatives, and we can't wait 2, 5, 10 years for there to be more options available. And
How many people do you believe are dying in Massachusetts from tobacco?
oh, it's over 9,000 a year. You can look this up. Look up
And
tobacco-related
how
deaths.
many are dying from COVID?
From what?
COVID, COVID.
I do not know off the top of my head, but it might still be a lot. COVID's still around.
Yeah, it's still around. It's killing people like me in my age.
I mean,
I don't know if it's over 9,000, but you believe there's still around 9,000, even though tobacco use has gone down.
I know, no, it shocked me too. I looked this up recently and was shocked that it's over 9,000. It's the leading preventable cause of death in Massachusetts. It's over 6,000 from alcohol every year. It's over 2,000 from opioids, and it's over 600 from suicide, an issue that disproportionately affects our veteran community. So people with end-of-life treatment, people who have terminal diagnoses, they might have eight months to live,
All right.
and they're dealing with a lot of distress. This could really help them.
If people want to reach you and find more about ballot question number 4, how can they do that?
Please follow us on social media. We're Yes for the number 4 MA. Yes for MA on social media. Also visit our website. It's maformentalhealth.org. That's maformentalhealth.org. Furthermore, feel free to reach out to me directly. My email is Graham, Graham, at maformentalhealth.org. That's Graham at maformentalhealth.org. Shoot me your tough questions. I have a lot. There's a lot of evidence backing this measure. I brought a lot of it to the studio with 5 pages of citations in .8 font or size 8 font, and I'd be happy to really get into the weeds with you if you want. If you don't want, you can leave me alone. But feel free to reach out to me directly. And please vote yes on 4.
And the voting will be November 5th, Tuesday, at the Franklin Fieldhouse between 6 and 8. And you can actually vote now by mail. And Nancy at the town clerk's office would love to see you. You can go down and vote in person. And she even has some Saturday and Sunday votings. And please read this whole pamphlet that has been put out. And in concerning question 4 for the yes side, I don't know why is this guy called a lieutenant? Sergio?
He is a police lieutenant in Winthrop.
Oh, he's a police lieutenant.
He's a police lieutenant.
In Winthrop.
Yes.
He can, so you can get a phone number right out of the booklet if you miss Graham's. Graham, I'm thrilled and happy and honored to have you come down and do the detailed explanation that you just presented. And I hope people watch the program and evaluate how they feel about the question. And we both want to see them in Franklin come out on Tuesday, November 5th.
Yes, please come out and vote. Your voice is very important to us. The more people voting, the better. We need to hear your point of view. Thank you so much, Frank. It's been an honor and a privilege to be here. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This program was made possible by your Franklin friends and neighbors, good folks just like you. Thanks for supporting Franklin TV. And thanks for watching.